So I've been asked to talk about some of the interventions I did when I was taught in public school. I have over 11 years in public school experience, plus also my own preschool, and so working with kids at all different ages. And some of the things that I did is I always tried to figure out before school even started with my classroom seating arrangement who would benefit the most from being in the front seats. And so if I knew a child was coming in with ADD or ADHD, I would always put them in the very front, closest to me when I would be doing direct instruction. And I also put them sitting next to a student that was totally on task and maybe one of the highest students in the class, so that they had the modeling next to them of a student that was the model student, and then also less distractions around him, because if they're in the very front row right under my nose, they're going to have a lot fewer distractions. Proximity was a really important thing to do with them, sometimes even just tapping their shoulder. Also, some of the things with their work, sometimes their mind would wander when they were doing work and it would seem like kind of like an overload of too much work. So sometimes I would actually draw a line and say, okay, you've got 2 minutes and I'm coming back and your work has to be done to this point, and then I'd come back and check it. And another way that I'd also kind of help with the work is I'd say, okay, you're going to do just this, and then I'd cover up the rest of the work with a piece of paper. And I'd make that so that they could kind of work through this so it wasn't overwhelming, but then eventually they'd move on to the rest of the work and not be overwhelmed. Other things that I did, I also had at the back of my classroom, I had a table that would face a wall, and I took 2 folders and I would staple them together, and I created like an office kind of cubby space, and I called it the office. And if students needed to work, I'd say, well, would you like to go to your office and work? And I gave it kind of them as the option to them to go and work on it, and so they could go without asking me to their office at the back. And I tried to make it a positive thing so that the students understood that adults sometimes need offices, and they have offices so they can go work and not be distracted by anybody, because their work's really important. And as students, they have important work, and sometimes it's good to go and have your own office to work in. Other things that I did, personally, ADD and ADHD runs in my family, and my mom and all of her sisters and also brothers have at least 2 children in their family that are ADD or ADHD and have been on the medicine. My youngest brother was diagnosed and he went on Ritalin. By that time, he was 6 years younger than me, and I was in high school, and my mom realized that I was ADD too. But I had learned to cope with it. I know that in my college classes, I always sat in the front row, and the first day in my college classes, I would always go, and I didn't necessarily choose the easiest teachers, but I chose the teachers who met my learning style. And if I was engaged the first day in how they taught, then I knew that I was going to be able to function in that class, and I always stayed in the front row. At the end, I would always rewrite my notes, take copious notes, and I find that even now I'm taking online graduate classes, I have to take notes, but I also have to have some place to doodle, because I'm not seeing anything in my online classes, and so I have to have places to doodle, kind of like multitasking. So my multitasking is the doodling and then also taking notes, and I'm able to function more. I've also seen in some schools, and I think this is a great idea, but back in the dark ages in the 90s, we didn't have those big balls, but they have those exercise balls now that they let some of the kids, and they can sit there and jump up and down. And I've also seen where they have the balls and they have them within seats, like little first grade seats. If the middle of the seat has been kind of carved out, and so that's a great thing that has come about since I stopped teaching in the public school that would definitely help your ADHD students. Things I would not do. My sister is also a teacher, and she started teaching in the 80s. She had a child that was just completely off on the ceiling, ADHD, and his dad also worked at the school as a psychologist. And between my sister as a teacher and her dad, they had the student's dad, they had this thing that they did with the child where he just needed to be up and out of his seat, and so she purposely put him at the back of the classroom in the corner so he wouldn't disrupt the other students. But again, this is according to the parent. I would not suggest choosing this, but the parent was a psychologist for the school, and they actually took a piece of crepe paper, which could easily be torn, and they kind of tied it around the child's ankle and also to the chair so that the child would know this is their zone of being. And they had to make sure it wasn't an embarrassing thing. For me, I'd be a little worried about that, but she said it wasn't humiliating. But again, I would not suggest doing that unless it's, a psychologist, father, and the teacher coming together, and it's working, and it's not definitely making the child embarrassed or the other kids laughing. But those are some of the things that worked for me.
My experience in working with students that have emotional disturbances has been at an elementary level. I was one of the administrators over at the school where we hosted kids that had emotional disturbance. We had about 12 interventions. First of all, I would hope that any kid, well, they have to have a behavioral plan, and so you need to follow the plan for each kid, and they're on an individualized basis. I would say that the first one would be verbal de-escalation for these children, to be able to help them and remove the stimulus that is creating that the behavior perhaps. If that's not working or wasn't working and they became violent towards themselves or to a peer, then we would go into CPI holds or restraints, but that was the last resource. You asked me about behavioral interventions. I think that you need to have a very structured class. They need to know their boundaries, what to do, what not to do, and what is appropriate and what's not. And as a classroom teacher, I think that the biggest tip, it's the verbal de-escalation and to know when to intervene and when to ask for help for intervention.
Always look at the environment first to see if we've set up an environment that is either causing distractions for a child that has autism, or maybe sets something up for failure for them to participate. Because the environment's a pretty easy thing to adapt to help a child feel successful. Now, because every child that has autism is different, the environment modifications might be different. Environment, I think, is the first place to start for a child with autism, because even textures and space can be something that can set a child off. Having a place for the child to retreat to, I think, is also really important. I've had children where we've needed to have a little cubby. So like in toddler lab, we had the cave under the slide, and so we had a little girl that we just taught that when she got overstimulated and needed to have a break, she could go under that slide, and it was dark, and it gave her the space and the visual confinement that she needed to calm down. So those are some of the environmental things I would start with. And then it would just depend on behavior, because each behavior you're going to approach differently, depending on the child and what the behavior is. If it's something like sitting at gathering time or participating in a large group, I would look at, what their tactile preferences were. And if there was like a fidget toy, that if they could be fidgeting and playing with something and that helps their ability to focus, then we would want to do that. We've used weighted bean bags and pillows before. Some children just need that pressure. We've sat them in bean bags. We've used cube chairs, different types of equipment to help them participate and be a part of the group. If a child comes in and has a hard time making a choice or a decision, we've used picture schedules.
Okay.
And so we've created picture schedules of the day in our classroom. And you can even do these at home. This is what I love. Picture schedules are universal.
Yeah.
And so you introduce the activity and you associate it with a picture. And then we usually put Velcro, and we start off and we say, okay, we're going to go hang up our coat. Oh, here's our picture. Let's go hang up our coat. Hang up the coat up. We're going to take that picture off and we put it somewhere. Okay. So visual schedules sometimes help children understand what's coming next. Because sometimes their behaviors come from not knowing, So I think picture schedules can be really supportive for children that have autistic behaviors as well. So, as you probably know, before you start working with any child, you want to kind of do a full assessment. That include interviewing the family, looking at the environments that they're in, seeing what their preferences are. Usually, when a behavior occurs, there's a reason. I really find that children with disabilities and children that have autism, they don't have a misbehavior because they're trying to be naughty.
Yeah.
It's usually because there's something that they cannot regulate within themselves. So I really think the key is if things aren't working, don't stop trying.
Yeah.
Because eventually something's going to work. It's just going to be going back to the board, collaborating, being like, okay, this didn't work. What are the other possibilities? What did we notice when we were doing this? You know, it's just observation is going to be...
Trial and error.
a lot of trial and error, because unfortunately every child's different and needs different things and regulates in different ways. So I would just say, don't get discouraged. Have a good, strong, supportive team, and just keep trying until you figure it out, because it's going to be so rewarding for you once you figure it out and you see that child starting to be successful and engaging in play and in the classroom and with their family and in the community, you know, like their parents and caregivers want them to. So.
Most all kids, I don't care if they're learning disabled or not, preventative strategies for discipline are what we've learned in motivation management. And it doesn't matter if you have a label on a kid over here or not. All kids have problems controlling impulse when they're bored. All kids have that problem, right? Not just certain types of kids. All kids have that problem. When I don't see any meaning into 50,000 worksheets here, when I don't see any meaning in that, I don't have to be LD to misbehave. So preventative strategies are things that we've learned in management class, which are one, in Ed Psych, which are these concepts. One is that kids have to be doing something. In that classroom, kids all have to be doing something. Not one kid at the board as 29 others sit. None of those things. But as many kids as can participate do. So I would have 10 kids to the board and they'd all have a partner pair. Or 15 kids, and they'd be in triads up at the board, and they'd rotate spots. I mean, they'd be up and moving and doing things. I'd have simulations where the child who, you know, can't put together all the reading and can't put together all the things as fast as other kids, maybe he's the equipment person, and he gets the equipment to the table. The other person is the one who reads the directions, and the other person is so those group cooperative strategies where you assign roles to people utilizes that kid. So first, good teaching is that kids are participating in activities that are authentic, that they're real, they're needed. Kids behave when they feel successful. When they don't feel successful, they'd rather be bad than dumb. Remember that scenario? So if you don't want kids to be misbehaving in your classroom, you can't have them sit there and say, okay, who's done and who's done the fastest, and everybody who's not done, and keep bringing that up. A kid's going to act like they don't want to do it then. Because who wants to sit there and say, I've been working and working and working, and I'm still pathetic, and everybody else is done. What I try to do with some kids who have impulse, let's say there's some impulse control with an LD problem. That can be anything from being able to be seated, so particular strategies, be able to be seated versus completing a long list of something. I would give kids, I'd give two problem sets at a time. So when you have those done, would you bring them up and let's get those checked? And so they're getting their next set. They're coming back up and getting their next set. So that they're moving, they're up, they see their problems in a smaller thing versus this whole sheet that just looks overwhelming to me. Many LD kids have difficulty with social signals as well. I just don't process reading that well, and I don't process math. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden I can process getting along with people well. So there are some things you have to teach. I've practiced with various kids about standing too close to other kids, being too loud, dominating a conversation, thinking they're funny when they're not, how that gets old with other kids. So we actually do skills. We actually talk about that. We actually talk about space and one arm's length. And so I give them a signal then when they're out in public doing that. Sometimes they're eating things are not socially acceptable. And we talk about what that looks like. And so when I'm in there, if I give them a certain signal, it means wipe your mouth. And many teachers avoid talking about those things, thinking some child will get it through osmosis, that they're being loud and rude because they're, misbehaving in some way. They're just many times social things that they haven't learned and they haven't practiced in the context of tons of peers.